There's something one of my mentors calls bad acting on the page, which is facial expression. She was like, no facial expressions in the book. It's so easy to say, he smiled, she winked, she raised her eyebrow. She's like, that is bad acting. Anything on the face is bad acting. Get in your body, get on the
Mm.
body, not on the face, get on the body. What reaction would you have instead of raising your eyebrows? What do children do when they're surprised? They don't really raise their eyebrows, you know?
Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan, and this is episode 163 of the podcast. And today is August 7th, 2024, as we record this. Today, we're talking about how writing can heal us and also breaking that taboo of children speaking in memoir. First, we want to thank our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here on the podcast. You can become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN, for books, writing instruction, coaching, planning, all the juicy, cool things. There's lots of different tiers there. You can go check it out. And also, Erick's got a Patreon page, patreon.com/Strange Air Stories for short stories in the paranormal mystery genre. Announcements. Regarding the 2024 Writercraft Writing Retreat and Workshop, the registration is still open. It's going to happen in like less than 3 weeks now. I've got 4 spaces left. There are day passes available also for the first time this year. And also, here's a big announcement, y'all. I've decided that because the Costa Rica move is happening next year, I will not be having a retreat in 2025. So if you're on the fence about going to this year's retreat, now is the time to make that decision to purchase the tickets for this month. So head on over to valerieisan.com/retreat for all of the info on that. Burnout recovery series on Patreon continues. So if you're a patron, you'll have updated videos and such over there. And part of my recovery is the addition of the Artist's Way, the creative clusters. So I'll be hosting creative clusters via Zoom starting tomorrow, August 8th, Thursdays, 10 a.m. to noon Pacific time. It's a 12-week program. It's only for my patrons, so go on over there and sign up as a patron. You don't need to attend live. You do need to attend live, but if you can't attend live, because I'm not going to be recording it. So if you cannot attend live, you can still do the program with me. And because every week I'll be posting in Patreon on the page, like what my updates are, what my check-in is, and how the week has gone. And that'll be the place where you can also share your stories as well. So we can have a little community chit chat over there about the Artist's Way and unblocking our creativity. That's what the program's all about. In case anybody doesn't know what the Artist's Way is, you can go to The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. There's links in the show notes, and I've read that book like 5 times. Have you read it before, Becky?
I have not read it,
Oh wow,
but it
it's like
sounds
32
wonderful.
years old. It's super. I've gone through the program so many times, but I looked back and I realized I hadn't done it for 7 years. So I was like, all right, I think it's time. I'm dealing with this burnout stuff, so I thought, all right, this is the best time to do it. So
Yeah, I've heard of it, so I'll take a look at it.
cool. Let's see, any other announcements? Erick is going to be hosting the Ghost Story Weekend for Wordcrafters. I believe that's in October. So you can go to wordcrafters.org for more information on that. And both he and I are speaking at the Write on the Sound writing conference in Gig Harbor, Washington. I'm also speaking at the Alaska Writers Guild Conference in Anchorage in October. So those are upcoming things for us. And our latest books, Focus and Finish, Goal Setting and Strategic Planning for Writers. That's out now, free everywhere, except for Amazon. I still can't get them to drop that 99-cent thing. You can get it on my website too for free. And Erick's Black Springs Saga Book 1, the prequel, is out now, and his Accidental Stranger, that's the title of the series, I think. Accidental Stranger, no, that's the title of the book. That's book 2 in the Black Springs Saga series, is he's doing the arcs right now. So if you're on his mailing list, you will have seen that that book is in ARC status. So if you want an ARC for that book, you can get on his mailing list. I think that's it for announcements for me. Becky, do you have any announcements? I should say Becky is joining me today. Becky Ellis, I'll read your bio after we officially get started, but any updates for you or announcements that you want to make at this point?
I don't really have any announcements.
Okay.
No. But I'm curious about this Costa Rica move that you mentioned, but I don't want to get us too far off track. That sounds fascinating.
I love talking about Costa Rica.
I want to hear about that announcement.
I've been wanting to move to Costa Rica for like 20 years.
And is it happening in 2025?
Yes. I mean,
Wow.
Fingers crossed. Like if everything aligns and everything works out the way I want it to.
That's amazing.
And all of the timed things. I mean, there's a lot of variables, like this has to happen and this has to happen and this has to happen, but I think it will happen next year. So I just feel like
fantastic.
Moving out of the country is going to be its own job. So
yes.
I'm going to have to like cut some things out. And that was one thing that I was willing to put a pause on. I love hosting the retreats. They're so much fun. And I always need a retreat by the end of the summer. Like summer is so exhausting for me. So, so I like doing
outward time.
So I am reading. Before we hit record, I was trying to figure out how to pronounce this. I did just finish a whole bunch of books. So, because we have had kind of a little pause on the podcast because Erick's been traveling. He is coming home today, though. That's why he's missing today. So I've read A Certain Kind of Starlight by Heather Weber. That's her brand new one, just came out last month. I've read Thunder Song by Sasha LaPointe. She's the native writer from Washington State. It's her book of essays. And I read Joe Wilkins' new book, The Entire Sky, which was so beautiful and amazing. He lives in McMinnville. Do you know Joe Wilkins?
I don't know Joe.
Oh, he's such a great author and a really nice guy. He spoke at my retreat a couple of years in a row. And whenever he comes to this part of Oregon, I go to his readings. He's just a beautiful writer.
Does he write about local stuff? Does he write about Wilsonville?
No, he writes about Montana.
Oh, wow.
Because he's from Montana. So his memoir is called I always forget The Mountain and the Father.
Wow.
I think that's what his memoir is called. But he writes poetry and memoirs and novels. So the new novel is The Entire Sky. His first novel was called Fall Back Down When We Die, I think. And that took place in Montana as well. And so does this one. So
beautiful titles.
Yeah. Well, he's a poet, so. Yeah. So what I'm reading right now, I cannot pronounce. It is a Korean translation. Because I work in a bookstore, I get lots of recommendations. Also, people buy things and I think, oh, that looks good. And this is a book about a bookstore. So I thought, hey, that's right up my alley. It's called Welcome to the Hyunam-Dong Bookshop by Huang Bo-Reum, which is totally not how you pronounce it, I'm sure. I'm holding it up for people on YouTube to see. And of course, it'll be in the show notes. But that's what I'm working on right now. What about you? What are you reading?
Well, I had an opportunity to travel to France this spring. And one of
Mm.
my favorite things to do when I travel is to go into a local bookstore that has English translations because,
Mhm.
I don't speak all the languages of the places I travel to, nor do I speak French. But so I'd love to go into a local bookstore and ask the shop owner, what should I read? What, is iconically French or, what is iconically, I was in India several years ago. What is
Mhm.
iconic? Which author should I read if I were going to
Mhm.
read one book? And so the shop owner directed me to Annie Ernaux. She won the Nobel Prize
Oh
for
yeah.
Literature in
We have a lot of her
2022.
books in our bookstore.
Yes, and I just finished A Woman's Story, which is a beautiful story. It's a mother-daughter story, it's youth age. It's so spare and so beautiful. It's an essay, so it was only about, I don't know, 90 pages or something, which I thought I could handle well traveling, but
What
I
was,
couldn't. So I read it just recently.
what was the title of it? A
It's
Woman's
a
Story?
woman's story.
Okay.
And then I just started A Man's Place, so a woman's story is about her mother, and A Man's Place is about her father,
Oh,
which
okay.
are kind of perfect books for me because a memoir writer and
Mm-hmm.
I've written a lot about my father and my mother. And this is
Mm.
a very French way of writing. It's very beautiful.
Oh, nice.
So that's what I'm reading at the moment.
I'm trying to think of other books written about parents, memoirs that I enjoyed. One was Joe Wilkins, because that was kind of growing up without a father in a very masculine world in Montana. So that one. And then also Crying in H Mart
Oh,
by
yeah,
Michelle
that's on my
Zahner.
list. Yep, to
Yeah,
read.
that was good too.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me read your official bio and we can get
Okay.
started on
Let's be
talking about your
official.
stuff.
Yeah.
Official. Becky Ellis is a timber wolf pup, the daughter of a highly decorated World War II combat sergeant. She is a veteran of a war fought at home. She earned a BA in English literature at UC Berkeley and has over 20 years of experience in the publishing industry. She teaches writing in Portland, Oregon, where she lives, plays, and has raised three daughters. Little Avalanches is her debut memoir, and she is on Instagram. So you can go find her over at instagram.com/Becky Ellis author. Welcome to the podcast, Becky.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's the official me.
That's the official you. So
The official
let me
me.
unpack that. First of all, you were saying Little Avalanches just came out not too long ago. So you have been on this book tour and now this podcast tour. So when did it come out?
It came out March 12th,
March 12th. Okay.
2024. Yep.
All right.
Yes.
And it is about your dad. Yeah.
It is about what it's like to be raised by a combat sergeant. It's about what happens when soldiers come home to raise families. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much written about war, especially about World War II, and so little written about what happens when those soldiers come home. So as a child, my father would not talk about the war at all.
Mm-hmm.
We knew he was in it, and we felt his struggle from it because he had PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all felt that, but there was no conversation at all around it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a young woman, I was searching and searching, trying to figure my father out and trying to understand maybe what he'd been through. And I had a really hard time finding anything from the perspective of what happens when they come home, or from the perspective of a child who has lived with um, someone who has been in combat. And it's becoming much more of a topic now.
Mm-hmm.
PTSD wasn't even a diagnosis until the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't in the DSM until then. And it was called combat fatigue or shell shock or something else. So it was being talked about, but there weren't, there wasn't a lot around it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a story about that. And it's written from a child's perspective because
Oh,
I
that's hard to
really,
do as an adult author, looking
yeah.
back so far.
Well, it's interesting. Writers look for their voice and they look for their voice, right? You're writing and you're writing. And I think I wrote three drafts before I got the voice of it. And I was writing and writing and writing. And finally I wrote this chapter about it's the chapter called Mary Jane's in the book. And it was about getting these brand new Mary Jane shiny shoes. And I thought it was this big, exciting present as a child from my mom, but it was so that we could go to court in a
Mm.
custody battle. And so I wrote that chapter and I wrote it from the child's perspective because I was just playing,
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm going to try something new with the writing. And it turned out that that was the voice. It's like,
Mm.
oh yeah, my writers group, my writing mentor said, that's it. That's the
Mm.
voice.
Ooh, I
And
have
I
chills.
felt it when I wrote it. And
Uh,
so, there I was back rewriting again. But, um, and it was really hard too, even writing from the child's voice. It was really hard to believe my story as a child was important, where I had lived in the shadow of my father, who was a war hero. And
mm.
how could a child's story live up to the magnitude of the story that this man had been through? My father served in the 104th Infantry, and he was in combat for 172 consecutive days. That's over
Wow.
6 months of being in combat.
How did you start talking to him about this? Because
Mm,
actually, I didn't realize how similar. So my dad is a combat vet too for Vietnam
wow.
and has PTSD and a host of other things too. And
Yes.
we never talked about it at all while I was growing up. And only now, I'm 50, only now do has he started, sharing a couple of little things from his past. But I still don't bring it up. I still don't ask him questions about it because I don't want to, touch on something painful.
Right, right. There's so much I could say about this. And I will say this is the most common question I get from readers too, who haven't read the book is
Mhm.
how did you start talking to your father? And the book is structured in three parts. The first part, which is the bulk of the book, is the child's point of view. And then the second part is a two-line transition, and you go straight into my father's combat experience, which is
Mm.
written first person, his voice. So it's an
Oh.
absolute change of voice. And then the third part is me as a grown woman, about 50 years old, 49, 50. And my father came to visit me where I live in Portland. And he asked if I had any issues to clear up. He was 89.
Mm.
And I had a ton of issues. He married four times. He fathered eight kids. He was an alcoholic for a long time. He put us into really dangerous situations when I was a child. And there were a lot of things we could talk about, but I really wanted to hear about the war, which
Mm.
you probably profoundly understand,
Mm.
that
Mhm.
desire to understand your father.
Mhm.
And so I asked him about the war, and he was really reluctant. But I tend to believe that my father raised me in his image to be really persistent. And he raised us to be tough as old nails, never give up, never quit. And that is how I ended up approaching that conversation was in the book, it's two paragraphs, but in real life, it was probably 2 hours of back and forth trying to tease my father, tease his story out of him.
Mhm.
But I will say, once he opened up and once he started talking, we talked for years
Mm.
about his experience. Every time he talked to me, he wanted to talk to me again. He wanted to
Mm.
tell me something else that he had forgotten to say or wanted to make sure I really understood something.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, Valerie, because I've talked to a lot of veterans since I've written the book. And I got an endorsement from a Vietnam veteran who has two daughters and has not talked to his daughters about it. And he's using the book as a tool to say, look at what happened in this family. Let's start talking. He's giving the book to his daughters and saying, let's start. And I have asked him, I said, I've written this. this 10 tips for having hard conversations, and it's on my website. And I say, I want to do one for veterans because it's different. I can tell you're getting really emotional. It's making me emotional because it's a life-changing, talking to my father was a life-changing experience. It completely changed my life, just completely. And this Vietnam vet, he was a bush. He was in the bush. He was a Marine. He was a bush Marine. So he saw the worst of Vietnam.
Your dad or this other?
No, the other vet.
Okay.
My dad was World War II. This veteran who's endorsed the book and is giving it to his daughters to start a conversation. He was a bush Marine. So he saw some of the worst stuff in Vietnam. And I have talked to him like, how do we talk to vets? How do we get your stories? Because they're so important. And while it's different for every single veteran, I'm about, let's pour a cup of tea. Let's take our time. Let's talk about this. And he said, if you're going to talk to a veteran, you better pour him a glass of whiskey before you start talking to him, which was a little comic relief, but the point was it's so hard for them to talk about this. And yet they desperately, I think, need to talk about it. And once my dad opened up, it was like the floodgates opened and his experience started to change too. My dad wouldn't talk about being in the war. He wouldn't wear a hat or a shirt or anything. He was a doctor also, and he always wore a tiny little American flag on his lapel when he wore a suit, which wasn't very often. But that was the only indication that he had ever been to war. And once we started talking, about 6 months or 9 months into it, he started wearing a World War II veteran's hat. And I picked him up at the airport and he had this hat on. And I thought, what has happened? Where is my dad? And has he lost his mind? It's like all this, he went from not talking about it at all for 70 years. He kept his stories for 70 years to having a broadcast on his forehead, which was such a huge transformation for him.
That's amazing.
So that was a long-winded way of, but it's all in the third part of the book. And I wanted to put that in there because one of my writing mentors had said to me that adults take in memoir like children take in fairy tale as psychological practice. And it is my belief, this was so life-changing for me, that we all need to practice having deeper conversations. And so I wanted to put how that story came out into the book. And it was hard. It wasn't easy. And continuing to talk about it was really disruptive for his life and for my life. But I think we need to talk about trauma, not to endure struggle and pain, but to come out on the other side so we can experience joy and happiness. And I think it's worth the journey.
So, getting a little crafty here.
Yes.
So you had talked about how to start those conversations with someone in your family. I guess I want to talk a little bit about, just in general, the fears that memoirists have about writing about their family. And if you have any tips or guidelines about the writing part, and how that feeds into that, like the secret keeping and the breaking those cycles of silence.
Right. I know
that's a tough question. There's like a three-parter, like, whoa, just tell me your thoughts on.
So important, because I think we're profoundly shaped by the secrets we keep, and we are forever changed by the stories that we share. And I have lived that experience. And like I said, I saw it in my father. And I think as memoirists, our first drafts, we just need to get them out. We need to get the stories on the page. And so many people who've read the book have said, has your father read this? Because the first part is tough. And it kind of wraps into writing from the child's perspective, the question about memoir. I think we have to write it like no one's ever going to read it.
Hmm.
And then we have to, I think one reason it takes a long time to write memoir is because we have to psychologically heal while we're writing it. And it's a process. It took me 10 years from the time my father started talking was in 2014 for the book to be published in 2024. And while the publishing process itself took a couple years, I would say I wrote for 8 years.
That's how long my first memoir took too.
And I think it's about that psychological practice. And one of the things that I learned along the way of writing was to be a just God on the page. And
Mm,
what that means is to be a just and fair author. Give everybody their reasons for doing what they do. So many memoir kind of lean towards victimhood. And if the writer is a just and fair God on the page, it should not lead towards victimhood.
mhm,
And an example I can give you in my own story is one of the things my father did was he took us to nude beaches when we were at an age that it didn't feel appropriate. So just coming into puberty,
mhm,
9, 10, 11-ish. And my father at that time had married a really young woman. He was in his 50s. She was 20 or 21, 22 at this time. And she was a hippie from the 60s, Judy. I love her. I still
mhm,
love her. She was a very foundational person in my life. She probably wasn't the safest person, but she was safer than my father. And
mm,
so when I first wrote this piece about being dragged to the nude beach and my experience there, which also wasn't a very safe experience, I kind of credited my father for taking us there. And while he drove the car and he took us to the beach, and he was our father and it was his responsibility. After I wrote the story, in order to be a just and fair God, I had to take a step back and say, now, why was my father going there? My father was going there to try to keep up with his young wife. And because he loved her so much, he was trying to please her. And
mhm,
just making that tiny shift in the narrative took it out of victim mode. So, even serial killers have their reasons,
mhm.
right? So no matter what the story is, if the writer can give the characters in the story reasons for doing what they're doing, I think that the memoir then will be much more well received.
By
And
family?
I think by family.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. Because people want to be seen. And
Mm,
I think even more than wanting to be seen, that's a whole nother thing, but I think they want to be felt. And when my family read the memoir, everyone in my family has read it. And everyone was totally fine with it. And I think that's because I gave everybody their reasons for doing what they're doing. And while they were my ideas of their reasons, I took a ton of time and put a lot of thought into, I know them. We know our family better than anybody else, right? And
mhm.
they know us. And I took a lot of time trying to figure out why they acted the way they did. And in that, I became a much more just God in my life. And I
Mm,
now travel through the world
mm.
understanding that everybody has reasons for doing what they're doing.
Yeah. That's
Person
kind
cuts
of
you
my
off.
little mantra actually when things are like, "Oh, why did that happen? Why did that person do that to me?" And then I remember, "Oh, well, everyone has a story.
Yes,
Everyone's got a reason for doing what they're doing, and
yes.
maybe most likely it has nothing to do with me."
Exactly. It wasn't to you. That
Right.
person did that in the world and you happened to be there,
Yeah,
right? It's like being
exactly.
cut off in traffic. They don't know you. They're not doing it to you. It's unsafe, likely, often. And why they're doing it, I don't know, but they must have a reason. Or
I
maybe there's
usually
some,
make up a story in my mind. Maybe they're on their way rushing to the hospital because their girlfriend's having the baby.
exactly. Or my mom is 94 and she still drives, and I often think, maybe it's my mom in the car. Like she can't see that well over her shoulder or something, Like I don't know, you know. So
So how did you talked about this being a really healing process for you and how, I mean, we're both memoirists. It is writing memoir is extremely healing, cathartic and starts those conversations with other people, but also with yourself too.
absolutely.
So how did writing impact your healing?
Well, I think it had such a transformational impact on me as a person and understanding myself, understanding my father. One of the things that happened when my father was telling me his story is that I saw him for the first time,
Mm,
separate from who I was. I think it's very rare that we see our parents or our partners or our children separate from our own needs and desires. And he got to a moment in his story where it was so horrible. It was almost like for the first time I saw him for who he really was, because he
mm,
had this huge history I knew nothing about.
mm-hmm,
My only experience with him was my experience with him.
mm-hmm,
And when he shared his self with me, his truest, deepest self with me, I was able to reframe who he was. And in seeing him, I was able to see myself. And it's almost like I saw myself for the first time. I saw my own history for the first time. And writing from the child's perspective had me do a whole lot of inner child work
yeah, I bet.
and really get in touch with who I was as a 5, 7, 9, 12, 15 year old girl
Mm-hmm.
and have compassion for her and let her tell her story finally.
Mm, finally, yeah.
Finally. And so I think that part of writing memoir, if we're really conscious about it and not, being a just God, I had to explore my own reasons for behaving the way I behaved. I was not a perfect child, and I needed to understand that part of myself. So I think if we allow ourselves the awareness and the consciousness, and I think deep writing does that. I think if we're digging into, especially a memoir, because it's a study of the self, but any book I think we're writing, we can go there if we
Mm-hmm.
really want to understand a character and someone else's point of view.
Did you read that book by, I think it was Melissa Febos, Body Work?
I did not read it, but I've heard great things about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was writing the last memoir, the one that just got published last year, I had told myself the story that I was putting on the page for years. And so I wrote the draft out several times, but as one does, and I'm an editor too, so there's that inner editor brain that just really kicks in all the time. But when I read her book, there was one sentence that has stayed with me from that whole book, and that was to not, when you're writing your story, not to write the story you've told yourself, but to write the real story. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but basically, don't just regurgitate this thing you've told yourself, but actually get in there and remember the story and tell that story. And
Right.
yeah, so that I think comes from or adds to what you were saying about the being self-aware and going in deep and seeing, yeah, that study of self, really
Right.
looking at yourself and seeing who you are and why you're doing the things that you're doing, in the
Right.
story.
And something's coming to me as you're saying that, which is around putting your characters in their story and in their situations. And, that Mary Jane story I talked about, it came to life on the page because I started to create the little world I was in, the courthouse that I had to walk through with these click, click, click shoes
Mm-hmm.
and how it was echoing off the walls. And I think if we really are able to set ourselves back in time through the setting that we're creating, through a very sensory experience, then we have access to that place. I think we can access that place
Like time travel,
through that.
a
Right.
portal.
And then really feel what it was like to be back there. And that's one of the things about storytelling for me. Part of the process and part of the healing. I'm a yogi. I've been practicing yoga for probably
That was
30.
going to be my next question, was about did you
Yeah.
do the yoga or the writing first? Because you said in your media kit that yoga was impactful in your healing process too.
Yeah, well, I've been doing yoga for almost 30 years. So yoga came first. But, it was part of my process that helped me get into my body.
Mm.
And I think that human beings, we are creature beings. We are living, breathing animal creatures, but we live mostly from the neck up, especially writers. Like we're all in our heads about stuff. And most writers I know, we're all in our heads. We tend not to be as embodied in life. And I yoga kept me and got me even more into my body. While I was writing the story, my yoga teacher passed away, and it was very sad for me, but I then started to study a different type of yoga, and I started to study Iyengar yoga. And Iyengar yoga is very specific, very alignment based yoga. And it's about
Alignment, body, like
body
joint
alignment.
wise. Okay.
Body alignment, but it's body alignment so that your mind can be aligned also. It's creating awareness in the body so you can have awareness inside. However, this body awareness, it's the type of awareness like we're standing in class and my instructor might say, pull your lower outer left kneecap up and back. And the concentration it takes to do that really gets you in your body. You really start feeling yourself. And this ability to feel yourself, I think, accesses the ability to feel your feelings as well. Like being in the physical body allows you to access the internal world as well in a much more embodied way. And it's part of, how I was able to feel myself as a child as well. Because I think that there's something one of my mentors calls bad acting on the page, which is facial expression. She was like, no facial expressions in the book. It's so easy to say, he smiled, she winked, she raised her eyebrow. She's like, that is bad acting. Anything on the face is bad acting. Get in your body, get on the body, not on the face, get on the body. What reaction would you have instead of raising your eyebrows? What do children do when they're surprised? They don't really raise their eyebrows, What did you do as a child when you were surprised? Not from the neck up.
Oh, that's true. That was still a facial expression.
Yeah. It's like in your body. Some kids get the wiggles, I don't know. I don't know the answer for everybody, but that was such a useful lesson.
Yeah.
And doing the yoga at the same time, it all just kind of, when you start paying attention to your writing life, it all starts wrapping around. Everything wraps around each other. And
this would be true for fiction authors too, any writer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I did this exercise for myself when I was writing. And I was trying so hard, like when I was learning, like get off the face and get onto the body in reactions. Someone sitting at a table, instead of someone getting nervous, instead of some weird thing they're going to do on their face, have them do it on their body. Start pulling a string out of a placemat, wad it up into a little ball and twist it between your fingers. That's clearly like someone who has this nervous thing going on, but it's not showing some like weird thing on the face, right?
That is a great tip. I love this tip.
Yeah. So this exercise that I did, I was traveling somewhere and I'm like, okay, I got to learn to get in my body, get in my body, get in my body. So I got on the airplane and I thought, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to be distracted. I'm going to sit in my seat and I'm going to close my eyes while everybody gets on board and while we take off. And I'm going to feel everything going on around me. And it's really hard to do, to sit there and listen when people are. I wanted to snap my eyes open about 1,000 times in 10 minutes.
Hmm.
But, and when you feel your body taking off in an airplane, I think we're so habituated to not feeling ourselves that we don't even feel how we're moving through space. But if you close your eyes and you really, no music, no nothing, just listen to the roar of the engines and feel your body soaring down the runway and then lifting off up into the sky, it's not something the human body should be doing or is supposed to do, I should
I
say.
get really bad motion sickness in planes taking off and landing. So I deliberately turn all of that off. I turn the fan on. I close my eyes. I can't read. I can't distract myself
Yeah.
any other way. I just have to like breathe and try not to puke.
Right. And I think even those things kind of take us out of our body because we're trying not to feel like, I don't want to feel this happening. And I talked to a friend of mine who's an ultra marathon runner
Mhm.
about, I don't think you're really in your body when you're doing that because how could you do that to yourself? I think it actually
Mm.
takes you out of your body, because
Well, maybe that's why some people do it.
exactly, it's possible.
Uh-huh.
So the mindfulness of being in our body and then allowing that to express itself on the page. And I think that really can bring stories to life.
Mm,
And
that's
and
amazing.
it's part of that healing process too, that awareness, that body awareness, and then turns into that internal awareness with the alignment, you know. And it all wraps itself around healing, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Something else in your media kit, you mentioned trauma bounce.
Mm,
What
the
should we
trauma
be
bounce.
on the lookout for when we're writing and maybe get re-triggered?
Well, the trauma bounce is about, there's a positive side to trauma as well. And so a good example of that is my father never let us quit anything. And I write about learning to water ski. I was 6 years old, and my dad decided for my sixth birthday, it was a privilege for me to learn to water ski. And I saw it happen to my brother the year before. And when my dad decided something, that was going to happen. And
Mhm.
so I was going in the water, even though for my sixth birthday, I still had baby teeth and was wearing footy pajamas. I'm
That's a little kid,
six
yeah.
years old. And I wanted like a birthday cake and balloons. I didn't want a water ski. But my dad got it in his mind. So into the water I go, and he drags me behind the boat over and over and over. And to make matters a little more difficult, he had trick skis, which are super flat, really hard to navigate on the water, hard to get
Mm.
up. He put little tiny fins on them, but it's like trying to water ski on a flat board. There's nothing to grip the water.
Okay.
Anyway, it was over and over and over this relentless. I had to try and try and try and try until I got up.
Hmm.
And while it was quite traumatic, and the things he said to me while I was in the water, he talked to me like I was, you know, a combat buddy of his,
Hmm.
profanity and all the stuff he's yelling at me while I'm in there and telling me, no, I can't get out of the water until I get up. If you quit, you're dead.
Hmm.
That was his mentality because that's how he survived the war. You cannot quit when you're on the battlefield. You will die.
Hmm.
And so he was trying to train us to survive.
Hmm.
And so in the end, I end up getting up and I
Hmm.
feel so powerful
Mm.
in that um, experience in the end. And the trauma bounce part of it is I don't give up on things.
Mm,
And I don't think I could have got my book published if I were a person that gives up. I think
right.
writing takes such determination
Mm-hmm.
and such grit to actually get through the process. So the positive aspect of that has some negatives too. Like it's the paradox of life. There are
Mm-hmm.
positives and negatives. And I think the trauma bounce is one of those paradoxes is trauma is not good. I don't wish trauma on anybody. And when it happens, there can be a positive side of it too. And that's an example of, and trauma bounce is a technical term used in in some fields of psychology.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't understand the bounce part. Like, what does that mean?
You're
But if
kind of
it's,
bouncing back from something bad, bouncing into something good.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I read it as a you're bouncing back into the traumatic lived experience, like being re-triggered.
Well, that's going to happen in memoir writing, right?
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
remember an author that I saw, a best-selling memoirist, came to Portland yeah, for a talk. And, there were hundreds of people in the audience. And she said that when she was writing her memoir, she spent half the time under her desk crying.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it took her. I didn't crawl under my desk, but I spent plenty of time in the shower in Forest Park on the trail doing my fair share of, you know, crying from the
Mm-hmm.
experience of revisiting it, re-experiencing it. So I do think it throws you back into the trauma. And I think we have to, as memoirists, have strategies to come out of that too. I was in therapy the entire time I was writing my book. I highly recommend that. I think it's so helpful.
Mm, yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
If you're therapy shy at all, then that could be a legit like writer. I mean, you can't claim that on your taxes probably, but but it's part of the job, you know, like maybe therapy should just be what you do when you're writing memoir.
I think
You can stop doing it when you stop writing the memoir, but while you're
right.
writing, yeah.
Yeah.
What other
I
strategies did you have
oh
for
well,
writing?
yoga
Yeah,
was one of my strategies
for sure.
also.
Yeah.
For sure. That really brought me into a space that felt safe, and I didn't really talk to anybody in my yoga studio about what I was doing, so I could show up with autonomy and I'm just here. I'm just a person doing yoga,
Yeah.
and just be in that space. And the other thing I love about something like that is it focuses the mind so incredibly into what you're doing. When I do headstand, I can't think about anything but standing on my head or I will lose
Hmm.
my balance.
Hmm.
So I am so laser focused on that. I'm not really thinking about the memoir or the trauma anymore.
Yeah, that's my
I,
experience with yoga too. I do hot yoga, the Bikram style.
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you're doing the standing head to knee, like, or the standing bow, like there's so many intricate parts and you're balancing and it's so, you don't think at all while you're in there. For 90 minutes, you're just like
In your
focusing
body.
on standing up or
Exactly.
whatever.
Yes. Yes, which is I think incredibly therapeutic for
It's
memoir writing.
meditative
It's very
in that
meditative.
way, you know.
Absolutely. Yes.
Parts of it are not relaxing, but
Well, I
but
did
meditation doesn't actually mean relaxation. It can after the fact,
right. It's
like lower.
relaxing
Yeah.
for the mind. I think it's relaxing. I think it allows the mind to go to a different place and
Hmm.
get out of whatever it's spinning around,
Hmm.
and focus only on that. Although I did do Bikram yoga one time.
Mm. It's pretty intense.
And I thought I was going to throw up. It was way too hot. I did it in Hawaii and it was just might not have been the right place to do it, but still I was one and done with Bikram. It was too hot for me.
The
And I'm a
first
really
thing that
cold.
they tell anyone in that, if for new people, is the only thing you need to do is just stay in the room. It's like, you know, like a sweat. Have you gone to like sweat lodges and stuff before?
I have not gone to a sweat lodge. Yeah.
That's pretty much all you do. Like just stay in the room, don't leave. If you're feeling nauseous, like lay down.
Yes.
Just stay there.
I remembered that. I remember that from that Bikram class I took, and it was a challenge to stay in the room.
You don't have to do anything, just lay in corpse pose and be there.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That was all of my questions that I had prepared ahead of time for for you, but I feel like there's so many other things that we can talk about. Like it really is strange that we have so many things in common.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. One of the other things about writing memoir that I will say is that I did this exercise where my editor said to me, get rid of all the exposition. It's like all of it, all the exposition and all the repetition. She said, let the action drive the story. And I combed through, and she said, you can thread it back in after you get it all out. And it really, I'm a scene writer. And so my book kind of reads like fiction in the way that it's all
Hmm.
set in scene, which
Hmm.
we were talking about, that's one way to get back into your real story, not the one you've been
Hmm.
telling yourself, is write it in scene
Hmm.
and take out all the exposition. And I think it's such an interesting exercise. And one of the things that I did in my writing workshop at the time was when I brought this back to my writer's workshop, the teacher decided we're going to highlight all the exposition in our story, like in our work. So if you even just take your highlighter and highlight all the exposition on your page, if you're not ready to cut it all out, but just
Hmm.
highlight all of it, I think most writers are surprised at how much they're telling and how little they're actually showing the reader. I think
That's a
that's
really
a
good tip too.
really useful thing to do as a writer, especially a memoirist, because we lean towards telling, because we're trying to tell our story. But I think we need to be a little more like fiction writers and be showing our stories.
Yeah. So I heard two amazing tips in this conversation. One was the bad acting, facial expressions, get off the face, get in the body. And then this one as well, like highlighting all the exposition and if you have the guts to get rid of it too.
Yeah, I mean, one thing readers have said to me about my book is I literally could not put it down. I read it in
Mm,
one sitting. I was up till 3 a.m. reading it. And it is because there is very little exposition in it. When you get to part three, I gave myself a little leeway. There's some exposition in there. And I think memoir requires some reflection.
yeah. There
But
is a lot of, I think that readers will accept a lot more exposition in memoir than in fiction because of the nature of that self-study and that reflective piece that's part of memoir. And that's
right,
part of why I read it because
we want to understand the
yeah.
author's wisdom. But there are so many ways the wisdom can be built into the action, I believe.
Say more about that. How can wisdom come through action?
I think you can show it in the character. The character is yourself, but you
Right.
can show it in the character arc and the growth of the character and through the actions they take towards the end of their story versus the way that the actions that they're taking at the beginning of the story. So I think if you really pay careful attention to the arc of your self, your
Mhm.
character, your protagonist, which is you in memoir, it's the same way it's done in fiction, is the thing. Because we learn from fiction too. We learn based on what's going around and how the characters do, how the hero's journey we're learning
Mhm.
from in fiction. It's the same in memoir. And I think we do have a little more leeway to actually straight up talk to the reader and share our wisdom with the reader. But I would say do as little of that as you can and um, really put it in the action of the story. I have
Mm.
an example in when my father was telling me his story. And it's the kind of this was around the moment where I saw him for who he was. I was really struggling with kind of tearing the past apart from the present. So I put this scene in the book about going into the laundry room and working with the laundry and untangling the clothes that come out of the washer. So
Mm,
instead of telling the reader, I'm really struggling with untangling my past from my present, and this is really complicated and it's tricky and hard to do. I made a laundry room scene out of it. And the washing machine, it's a giant metaphor for what was going on internally for me. So I'm physically pulling jeans apart from t-shirts and pulling socks out of the pockets of the pants, and I'm untangling the wash. And then there's maybe one tiny line in there about untangling the past from the present.
mm.
Rather than going into 3 paragraphs about it, I allowed the wash to represent it. And that's how we can put it into the action and put it into a scene.
So one of the harder parts about, right, because I've written fiction and memoir. So one of the harder parts about memoir writing for me is mining my life for scenes to to represent what I am trying to say. Like if it didn't happen in real life, I can't put it in there. So how do I think I lean maybe too heavily on exposition because I don't find the places where I can use them as metaphor or whatever.
So what one thing I tell writers that I work with is there are so many objects in your story. They're already there. They're probably in your first draft, you know, and you just have to grab a hold of them and use those opportunities that are actually, I think intuitively, we know we put it on the page. And then when we go back, I think they're there. You just have to look for them. It's like rather than mining your life, mine the page for
Mm,
what's already there. So there's this scene I wanted to tell the reader that this experience with my father, I wanted to tell the reader what it was doing to my marriage. And rather than telling them, I wanted to show them how this was impacting my marriage. So I put myself at the kitchen sink with my former husband, well, my husband at the time, and I just had us wash dishes together. It's such a simple act, but that page in my book, it's like page 242 or something. Almost every single time I talk about my book, people want me to talk about that because it's so potent.
but
Just
it did happen or it didn't happen in real life?
it did happen.
Okay, you
I
said you
mean,
put your husband and you at the sink. So what does that mean? You found a passage in the rough draft where you were washing dishes together?
well, I thought about it. I thought we're in the kitchen. We had
Mhm.
had a family meal and we're in the kitchen. And at first we weren't at the sink together. And I'm like, no, like, let's wash the dishes together. We've washed the dishes together 100 times.
Mm,
I
mhm.
mean, uh, the book Tell It Slant. Like memoir is a combination of things. Did that happen exactly that night? No, it had happened 100 times. I don't
Right.
know
Yeah,
if it
yeah.
happened that night,
It's
but
something that you normally did together. So whether it
we
happened that night or not, you can bend time, in
exactly.
memoir.
We did it together sometimes. So I thought this is a perfect representation. It was being at the kitchen sink, washing the dishes, being 2 inches from each other, but feeling miles apart.
Mm,
And it was that experience. It's looking at the reflection in the mirror, but it is showing that in the action of showing us and our reflection so close and yet feeling and behaving next to each other like we were completely out of sync and totally miles apart from each other.
mhm,
So
mm,
I think it's all there. It's
mhm,
at the washing machine, it's at the kitchen sink. The settings in my book in the third part, it's all pretty much there was one soccer field when we took my 8-year-old to a soccer game with my dad, but the rest of it's in my house. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had to use things in the house
Mm-hmm.
to, and they're all there. It's the way we live. It's all around us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am totally buying this book right now. I want to see all this. I can't, yeah. I I think that by reading your book, I'll probably have the opportunity to talk with my dad more too.
And honestly, that's the most important part for me. My book is that is the most important part. My book has come from my heart, and it was a heart project to really get people to feel more connected to each other and to know that we can all have compassion for each other and we can be more deeply connected. There's this, there's this, we all say we want to be seen and heard, but I
Mm-hmm.
think even more we want to be felt. And when I feel you feeling me, that is the healing moment. And that happened for my dad over and over. I think he felt me feeling him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where his um healing, I think, began to happen, because for 70 years he wouldn't let anybody in. And I think I spoke to a group of Marines a couple months ago, and there were probably 25, 30 of them there, and they were really tough. And one of them said to me, "You want us to tell our stories, but do you think anybody can really understand us?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is no. I can't really understand your experience. I tried so hard to understand my father's. I got as close as I could. But in the 1% chance that somebody can feel you and feel your experience, it's totally worth it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Yeah.
I do think we can feel each other when when you're in the presence of somebody who's feeling you. I think you know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's truly where the healing happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for my book, I want to get this little I don't have it memorized. Let me grab this sheet. It's my publisher is Regalo Press. And
Mm-hmm.
the editor who started it, Gretchen Young, left one of the big five houses and started her own imprint. And this is her mission in publishing books. She says, "Our guiding principle is that the only thing better than creating a great book is harnessing that greatness in service of others."
Mm-hmm.
And that was so aligned with why I wrote this story.
Mm-hmm. In service of others.
In
Yeah.
service of others. Yeah. And I think even as memoirists, if we can think about that, what psychological practice are we trying to share with our readers?
That's really interesting because a lot of times when people write, we're told to like, I mean, we're manipulating the reader's emotions. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're like, okay, we want the writer or the reader to feel this. So, what can I have the character do to make the writer feel this? And what you're saying is just almost the opposite.
Well, I have manipulated my reader. I want to own
I
that. And I've done it in structure, actually. The
uh-huh.
structure of my book was really hard because memoir, you're supposed to tell one slice of one life, right?
Hmm.
You're supposed to tell
Yeah.
a slice of life.
Hmm.
I've told two slices of two different lives. There's a slice of my childhood, there's a slice of my father's life at war, and then there's our slice together as he's telling me his story.
Hmm.
And so I really feel like that, and the structure was really difficult for a long time. And I'm thinking 6 years, my stories were braided together with a ton of flashbacks and memories are rising up and that kind of thing. And then I pulled them apart. So the childhood is first. And I think I said early on, there's two lines of transition, and then you're at war with my father.
Hmm.
And over and over and over again, readers are saying, by the end of part one, I despised your father. And 2 pages into part two, I was overcome with empathy and compassion. And I wasn't confronting little Becky or your father anymore. I was confronting my own capacity for suffering and compassion.
Mhm.
I was like, that is exactly what I wanted the reader to do. I
Right.
wanted the reader to experience what I experienced, which was this feeling about my father that, yes, I felt his wound, but I didn't understand him. And it was also almost this kind of, I don't want to call it anger, but I carried something for him that was not compassion. I probably felt every other feeling you could have for a person except compassion for my father. And then he told me his story, and I was totally flooded with compassion for him. And so I wanted the reader to experience that. So I did manipulate the reader in that way.
But you did it in service to the
In,
reader.
in service to the reader. Yes. I think we should always think about what are we in service to? We're in service to the reader, right?
Mhm.
And so what are we trying to teach the reader? What psychological practice have we been through that we can now share with the reader? Because that is why we are reading memoir, is for psychological practice. It's usually to survive something, because a lot of memoir is survival based. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
to
why I
learn.
read it,
Yeah.
to know what to do.
Yes. Yes.
Reading fiction helps me understand who I am in humanity, but writing memoir helps me know what to do. Like,
Right.
even if it's not a, even if it's an experience that I have not been through and probably won't, like, I don't know, it could be anything. Like, like Joe Wilkins' memoir. Like, I'm not a little kid growing up in Montana who doesn't have a dad and, is dealing with. So it's totally not my life at all. But I still learn what to do in other parts of my life as metaphor, like, oh, this person
Exactly.
did it this way. So in this totally not related way, I can also be like him growing up. And kind of like that, like trauma bounce, sort of in what you were saying. Like, you can take this and bounce from it and apply it to your own life.
Right. And I want to make sure listeners don't think this is something easy to figure out, because it took me a long time to figure out, what am I doing? What am I trying to show and teach? Like, what is the story really about?
And just to get to that place, I want to say that took me a really long time because I
Me
kept
too.
having, as an artist, like, you have an idea of what you want it to be. And when you go to the page and day after day after day, it's not what you think it should be, that
It's
that was
really,
frustrating, and you have to, like, let go at some point of what you think it should be and just let it be whatever it is. And then whenever that gets on the page, then you can start saying, okay, what is this really about? Like,
yeah, it's almost like you have to let it become. And it's an
mhm,
evolution. I think
mhm,
you got to write it and write it and write it and write it and keep going, keep going, keep going until it becomes what it is supposed to become. And to the point that it took me a long time to figure this out. It was suggested to me, like it is to many writers, start a newsletter, start building your readership before you publish early on. And I thought, I don't know what to tell people in a newsletter. I honestly had no idea. It really wasn't until after readers started talking to me and asking me, well, how did you get your dad to talk? My mom won't stop talking about the broken furnace. She won't talk about anything else. Like, how can I get her to talk? I'm like, oh, okay, now I see what I should be writing about. And I'm just now finally, I should have done this 4 or 5 years ago. Honestly, I know, right? Hear this, writers, start your newsletter. Start it well before you publish, because I think it would have been so helpful. And I'm finally starting one about these complicated, messy, sometimes funny conversations we have. And I'm sharing one every month about, okay, here's one that I had that was tough. It was messy. Here's how I navigated through it. Because
mm.
that's really what the story is, my memoir is in service to, right? And it's hard to figure it out. I just wanted to say it's hard to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. This makes me want to write another memoir so that I can do all these things while I'm writing the memoir. But now I don't know I know there's another one coming. Just moving to Costa Rica, I think will be the next memoir. But
talk to your dad, you might find it there.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. That's very true.
Find it there. Yeah.
Well, we are totally out of time. I've just talked your ear off. This is amazing. I'm so happy that we got a chance to talk, and I think everyone should go out and get this book, Little Avalanches. It just came out. Where is it for sale? Tell us about whatever you want to plug.
It's at most indie bookstores. Your indie bookstore can order it. It's, the usual online e-tailers. It's
available everywhere books are sold.
Available everywhere books are sold. I will say, it was very humbling and thrilling that the book won the 2024 Rubery Book Award for Nonfiction Book of the Year. And Rubery is a international award given for compelling storytelling and quality writing, essentially. And so
you are an award-winning author now.
It was thrilling and humbling also. Their review was generously empathetic. And I learn from every review I read also. I think that's to receive a review is such a gift because I learn more how the story is being received. Yeah. And
in closing, I just want to ask, in your bio, you say you're a Timberwolf pup. What does that mean?
So the 104th Infantry Division are the Timberwolves. That's their nickname.
Okay.
And the Timberwolf Pups, it's actually a national organization of
family
descendants of the Timberwolves or the Timberwolf Pups.
Okay.
Yeah. Every kind of division has their 101st Airborne were the Screaming Eagles, and every kind of division. Your dad's division has a nickname.
I'll have to ask him that. Maybe that can be the start of the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it can. Yeah. One veteran told me start on the surface, get the logistics, start on the surface, and then you can kind of work your way down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent talking with you. Let's keep in touch, Becky. Yeah. That would be lovely. That. All right. And we're on the same coast, not too far from each other. So maybe we'll meet in real life at some point too.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
See you next time. Bye-bye.